Right, Oz, thank you very much for my first guest on my podcast.
The very first, and you choose me.
Yeah, the Mike Stanier show.
Aha.
It's an honour, mate. So,
That far. Go on.
right then, all I can say is, mate, when it comes to Northern Soul, locally, you're one of the first names that I think of. Massive scene in Stoke, as you're obviously aware of.
Yeah.
And I just want to make people aware that weren't really big on Northern Soul, what it was all about, how it first started, when it started, and basically the impact that it's had on your life, and the impact that you feel it's had on other people's lives.
Okay, very briefly, because obviously
Okay.
time is the essence, but this has all been born pretty much out of the mod movement. So clubs in London like, Flamingo, Whiskey Go Go, whatever.
Are we talking 60s here?
Oh yeah, we're talking the mid-60s, where really the Motown sound was just starting to come into the UK, and we were experiencing, Baby Love by the Supremes, and we're experiencing some run-of-the-mill Motown sounds that an awful lot of the mod movements were sort of hitched onto. They liked that kind of thing, alongside other groups, there's the Kinks, the Who, all the usuals.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will say is that as the 60s become the 1970s, the Motown sound remained really popular up north, that classic sort of 4/4 beat. It was just, it was perfect for us. And in the 1960s, there was a few clubs that were then catering for, I suppose, the mod movement. And you got places like the Twisted Wheel in Manchester,
Yeah.
you've got the King Mojo, you've got various little places happening, little pockets all over the country. And I suppose at that particular time a scene was forming. And
Yeah.
we didn't know, of course, that it was going to become Northern Soul. It was just soul music. So if you were taking certainly into the latter part of the 1960s into the early 70s, I think that was the absolute key moment for the birth of Northern Soul. Because some people say the birth of Northern Soul was at the Twisted Wheel. Well, it kind of was, but it wasn't really, because what lit the Blue Touch paper, the catalyst, if you like, for Northern Soul, was a club just a few miles from where we are right now. It was called the Golden Torch in Hoe Street in Tunstall, Stoke-on-Trent.
Right. Yeah.
And that was the turning point for an awful lot of people. That was Northern Soul.
So was it that there was a lot of smaller clubs playing Northern Soul, but then the Twisted Wheel was like a bigger venue, on a bigger scale, like of
no, because the Wheel wasn't really massive. I DJ'd at the Wheel, a fair few times actually over the years, but it wasn't a massive venue. A lot of people went to the Twisted Wheel,
right,
because it was the kind of place that was accommodating a movement who wanted to experience Benny King live on stage, or various artists coming through, Innes and Charlie Fox, for example, all these kind of things which were completely alien to anybody else. And of course it wasn't really the time for discotheques to be really popular. That came, of course, in the 70s, all the usual, the disco boom, etc. But in that late 60s, the Twisted Wheel in Manchester was absolutely, it was key to bringing over these incredible, the Drifters were there, and just the list goes on and on. Brilliant, outstanding American acts, and with DJs like Roger Eagle and quite a few others. There was other venues in Manchester as well. Barry Tasker at the Pendulum, who played some really really good stuff. Brian 45 Phillips was the guy who was selling great records, took his name from a record. Just brilliant, this is all very 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 important. But when it got to the Wheel closing and somewhere else had to pick up that baton and run with it, that was the Golden Torch. And in came, most notably, Keith Minshull, Colin Curtis, Alan Day, Martin Ellis, Johnny Beggs. These were the guys who were... The playlist was incredible.
So, with obviously a lot, whether you like Northern Soul or not, 99% of people in Stoke-on-Trent are aware of the Golden Torch venue.
Yeah.
But I'm a massive T-Rex fan, and obviously Chris Burton put on put on T-Rex. I can't remember the year to be exact, but I think it was the early 70s. So even though it was like a Northern Soul venue, why were you getting these type of bands on there?
Strictly speaking, it wasn't. So when Chris Burton opened the Golden Torch in the middle 60s, I think Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas was the first band.
Incredible.
For the opening night. And it goes back to Chris Burton becoming, or should I say, being around in the 60s as a guy who brought and put bands on.
Yeah.
He was involved with Dave D, Dozy Beaky, Mick and Titch, and he was involved with the Beatles a couple of times, and he was a guy promoting live music locally in this area, Trentham Gardens, the King's Hall in Stoke, all these different venues. And then what Chris Burton did was he opened the Golden Torch, and actually it was described as a bit of a dive by the locals, a bit of a mod club, but also Chris would try anything as an entrepreneur would, and say, right, Thursday night is going to be hot pants night, Friday night's going to be heavy metal night, Saturday's going to be soul and Motown night, or whatever. Chris was trying everything, and to be fair, I'm sure Chris will be the first to agree that the club wasn't doing that well until Keith Minshull went to see Chris Burton and said, I want to put on a soul all-nighter. Chris hadn't got a clue about the music. He was horrified that he had to open his venue all the way through until 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever, unruly time.
Do you think many alcoholic drinks were sold back then, or was it
very
mainly,
little.
Mainly water, was it?
Well, it wasn't really water. It was probably the usual Pepsi Cola, orange, whatever.
Okay.
But of course, we'll get to the reason why people stayed awake all night in a bit later on in this little podcast.
We'll use that as a link then.
We'll use that as a link. But I don't think alcohol was ever the main concern. In fact, most people used to go round the corner from the Golden Torch to the Sneed Arms in Tunstall and have a little couple of beers before they'd venture around the corner into Hoe Street and then into the Golden Torch. It was absolutely, some great live acts. Again, Chris incorporated that live act scene and brought some brilliant live artists over. Most notably Major Lance, which was the 9th of December 72, if memory serves. That was an incredible moment for Northern Soul, because I think the club held round about 700 and there was about 1,500 in there, and goodness knows how many outside who couldn't get in. And Chris Burton's the kind of guy, if he can get them in, he'd have got them in and took the money off them.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the nicest possible way. I love Chris.
Yeah.
I spoke to him last night, by the way. And it was just one of those, key moments of Northern Soul. But the Torch, I've got to stress this, although the artists were really important, the playlist was the absolute catalyst to what Northern Soul is now, and it's also detriment to how important that venue is, because 90% of the playlist at the Golden Torch is still played now. Just absolute dance floor winners. It was Northern Soul heaven for 14 months, and I'm not old enough to experience this, but I've got pretty much every record that was ever played at the Golden Torch, and I'm never tired of them. And do you know what? All these years on, the audiences haven't tired of them either.
Do you think that shows the strength of some of the DJs that were around Stoke at the time, that they'd actually got the ear for the sound, for the sound of the right songs at the time?
I think a lot of people will cherrycoat and try to rewrite history, but I will tell you now, if there's one guy who lived, jumped and breathed Northern Soul, it's Keith Minshull.
Yeah.
And Keith Minshull was key at the Golden Torch. Keith had the records. Keith was breaking the records. Keith was playing things like Eddie Parker's Love You Baby, and because Keith was Keith, he had 2 copies. On the flip side was the instrumental. Now, in the early part of the 1970s, instrumentals were massive. If you found an instrumental cut or a version or whatever it may be, you were king. Okay, maybe for a couple of minutes on the turntables, but you were king. So Keith played Love You Baby, and then straight after played Love You Baby instrumental, and the crowd just went, what the heck is going on here? That's Keith Minshull. That was somebody who had vision, he had mixing skills, but he also had a brilliant programming side. Keith knew what made dance floors work. Keith would go through his box religiously, not just pulling out songs willy-nilly.
Yeah.
I think Keith pretty much thought about every DJ spot that he did and chose the best records.
So obviously, Keith passed away not too long back. He was older than yourself.
Yeah.
Obviously, when it comes to more like, well, how can I word it? Say the younger Northern Soul DJs. Don't flatter yourself, but when it comes to the younger DJs, you are one of the first names that springs to my mind. And obviously, when it comes to probably the older generation, that's when I think of Keith. But it's not just locally with Keith, was it? That he got a name.
No, not at all.
He was. He was there. He was there at the beginning. Well, was he there at the beginning?
The thing what you have to look at as well, most importantly, and again, this is purely down to Keith and what Keith did, and how Keith played records, how he obtained records, because we're talking about imported records from America.
How did he get them though? Like, obviously we say imported. It's not a case of going on the internet and ordering them. So
obviously not. No, back in those days.
How did he get them?
What
Was it magazines or?
Yeah, there was publications like Blues and Soul, and they were really important for people to have a list of records that were available for very little amount of money as well. Quid here or 85p or whatever. But also there was some shops. I mean, there's tales of Johnny Beggs and a few others going on the train to Manchester and going to spin in. There was obviously a little bit later on in Stoke-on-Trent, not far away from where we are. There was Buse in Burslem, that dealt with imported records from America.
Was that near Cox's Entry? Is that right?
Buse is actually the India Cottage.
Ah, right.
The restaurant. So you know where it is now.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was places like Buse. There was Spinning in Manchester. There was Symphonia, I think it was called, in Blackpool, and in Nottingham there was the wonderful Selector Disc, who very quickly. There was also another couple of places as well. There was I think Record Corner in Balham in London were dealing with a bit of Northern Soul imports at the time and running with it just for a short period. And then also in Walsall there was Ruby Red. Ruby Red Records, very, very important, because Ruby Red was in Cleveland Street, and the money he pretty much made off the Northern Soul imports launched a dance label called Cleveland City in the 90s. So there's a little bit of useless trivia for you, but these were the shops where you couldn't go into Woolworths and say, I'd like the Dramatics Inky Dinky Wang Dang Do, because they look at you like you got 5 heads. So you had to go to any of these specialist shops to get these imported records, which again Chris Burton was also involved in. I'm not going to say too much about that, but Chris was involved in, should we say, the supply and demand of Northern Soul. You wanted records, Chris supplied that demand. That's all I'm going to say.
Back then, well, I'll say back then, I'm taking, is this mid-60s? We're talking mid-60s now.
Not at all, we're talking the late 60s really. 60, 68, 69 is where things started to move.
It wouldn't be a case of like walking into HMV now and there's 20 copies of one album. Would you just walk in and there's literally one copy of a certain single, or would you have like 3 or 4 of the same single for sale? Well,
to be fair, the early stages of Northern Soul, which obviously we got to include the Twisted Wheel.
Yeah.
There was some British labels releasing American products. So, for example, labels like Stateside. There was also Capitol Records, had a Discotheque series.
Yeah.
And you could obtain these records. The problem is that they were normally done in very short runs. You had to order them.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of pot luck if you thought, well, this record sounds okay. I wonder who this Alexander Patton is. I'll give it a whirl.
Yeah.
So you go and say, have you got this Alexander Patton record? They say, no, but we'll order it for you. Sometimes you were lucky. The following week you go in there, and there is your, Alexander Patton on Capitol.
But was it like you'd hear the song on the radio and you'd think, I want this on record, or would it be a case of going to an all-nighter, hearing a song, jotting it down, memorising it, and and thinking, I'm going to source this record out?
Potentially both. And the reason why I say that is that if you go back to those early days of pirate radio, so for example, Radio Caroline were playing, excuse me, quite a few Motown records. And I think that was down to the fact that we're trying to sell advertising. So if you were taking, let's say, Radio 1, in terms of a playlist, and they say, we're not going to touch any of them records, we're going to play our own records.
Yeah.
And they proved to advertisers when those records then got into the charts that we got a lot of listeners.
Yeah.
So of course encouraged advertising to come through, but also they were picking some really good records. And the guys like Mike Raven were playing fabulous soul records. So much so, I mean, Mike was involved with MGM Records, and his theme tune was taken from a Bo Dollar and the Coins record, which again he was involved in. He used to play that as his opening theme. Just fantastic times. But there was also some imported records that were coming through, filtering through the back end of the 60s. Records with big holes in. What's this all about? Didn't know what these existed. It looked like a jukebox record.
Yeah.
And of course these were imported records, and I suppose the tail end of the Twisted Wheel was for the start of imported records. Things like Baby Reconsider, Leon Haywood. There was also Sandy Sheldon, You're Gonna Make Me Love You. All these kind of records were coming through as American imports only. There was no British release whatsoever. And then there was a supply and demand on a label called Soul Sounds, which were actually made in the UK and distributed from the back of a car boot. And the whole run of Soul Sounds, every single one, was just mind-blowingly good. And if you got they're all, shall we say, not counterfeits. I don't want to call them bootlegs. These are just records that look fantastic. I've got a few of them even in my collection. And you look at the Soul Sounds label, and it was just fantastic. A lot of thought went into this, and it was just quite simple: supply and demand, and that was it. They were about £1. And a full set now is really rare. You just can't. But there was such an important part of the scene, so I'm not going to condone bootlegging or counterfeiting. But these were kids who were going to nightclubs, they were hearing records for the very first time that you couldn't hear, either like you just said, on the radio, you couldn't hear them. You couldn't hear them at youth clubs or anything else like that. Local DJs, these weren't playing these songs. These were records that were being spun by literally king spinners, the Keith Minshulls of this world, you know, the Martin Ellises, the guys who were moving and shaking with imported records, the Colin Curtises. And they wanted them. And guys were happy to get these records made and sell them. And that was it.
Because
that's how you got the record.
As you probably know, I collect records. I don't know whether it's on the same scale as yourself. I collect all singles. Very rarely, purchase an album. And the stuff I buy is quite valuable. I think when it comes to indie stuff, I think people will be pretty impressed with my collection. But I could probably mention the value of a couple of my records, and you were probably paying that much for records in the 80s. So what is it with Northern Soul records? Because it just seems to, the prices just blow everything out of the water of anything I've ever bought. Like I've got plenty of Northern Soul records, but I'd probably consider them to be represses, even bootlegs, the word that you don't like to use.
Well, it is what it is.
So, what is it with Northern Soul? Because I've never seen anything like it when it comes to records.
The thing is with Northern Soul, if you look at the record collecting scene in general, first of all, from the outsider looking in, and we've experienced this in America firsthand, crate digging, and they always think about the Beatles, and then you think
great band.
Opinions vary. So you got the Beatles, and you got Elvis Presley, and you got whatever. But what I will say is that the Beatles, by and large, sold millions of records.
Yeah.
So not everything that the Beatles ever produced is worth a lot of money. So there's a misconception there. The same goes for Elvis, of course. No two ways about it. And the same could be said for quite a lot of other big artists. Cliff Richard, who sold millions.
Yeah.
Adam Faith, who sold millions. So all these collecting scenes, but you've got the rock and roll scene and Northern Soul as probably the two closely side by side.
Yeah.
Very, very similar scenes where people will dress accordingly, then they will try and collect original records. Now, the one thing I will say about Northern Soul is, I don't think anybody who was getting into Northern Soul in the early 70s, whether they were buying original records, reissue records, counterfeit records, however you want to describe it, nobody knew that some 40 to 50 years later we would see prices of these records just go through the roof.
It's incredible.
So I bought records in the middle 80s for like £25, which are now changing hands for £1,000. But it's really simple. The concept is really simple. You can manufacture as many reissues or lookalikes as you want to. You can't manufacture original records. So first is always first. First is forever. Of course. So you're going to want to own an original first edition, first demo, whatever it may be, of a particular record. And they're thin on the ground. So now it's become, well, I've got one, but make me an offer. Well, it goes for about £100. I want 500. Oh no, it only goes for £100. Well, buy one then. And the trouble is, you can't buy one.
Yeah.
And if that's the only one for sale at £500, guess what? You're going to pay £500 to get it. And that's the way the collecting scene has gone with Northern Soul. But in the last I'd say the last sort of 20 years really, from a collector's point of view, when you go to venues and you see people DJing, I'm one of them. I only DJ with original records. I don't DJ with counterfeits or reissues. Nothing against anybody who does. Is
that because you personally know yourself that that's not an original, or is it because obviously I've been to Northern Soul Do's and there's been screens showing off the record that's on the deck.
Yeah.
So
they were my screens, by the way.
So is it a case of the audience? You don't want the audience to know that they are not an original record, or is it just something personal to yourself, I
think it's a mixture of people paying money to go and see a person or a number of DJs play records.
Yeah.
When they go to that venue, they go, oh goodness me, it's there. Look at that, it's on an ABC demo, or that's really rare, it's on a Tower issue, or blah blah blah. And they can see if the record that's coming on next suits them or not, whether to go to the loo or maybe nip out for a smoke or have a chat with somebody, or I've got to stay on the dance floor because that's on next and I love that song. But also it demonstrates and illustrates that disc jockey is just playing original records, which is what the scene has been based on. It's a
nostalgia thing as well, isn't it? If I go, it's different. With some nights, if you're going like a dance night, 9 times out of 10 you go around town and they'll be using a laptop. Some use records. If you go into a Northern Soul Do, you kind of expect to see the person who's DJing using records.
Now. Yes, absolutely. I'll tell you now, records have always been important. Records, for whatever reason, on Northern Soul, you can't entertain MP3s. You can't even entertain, let's say, compact discs, for example. And I've got no issues with anybody who wants to play whatever they want to.
But however, but if you're going to a children's party, then you kind of expect the guy to be using a laptop.
That guy's got no choice.
Yeah.
If you are doing a mixed audience, some would like soul, some like pop, some like rock or country or whatever, you have to have a collection catering for everybody. When it comes to Northern Soul, you are playing Northern Soul records. Now, I've gone to Northern Soul nights and every single record by a particular DJ has been fantastic. I've heard some Northern Soul DJs play an absolute hour worth of total dirge that would never ever get anybody up on the dance floor, and I've seen that happen on a number of occasions, to be fair. But what I'm going to touch on, and the most important thing, is this was never apparent in Northern Soul's heyday. In the 1970s, the most important thing about Northern Soul as a movement was to get hold of that song, whether it be on a UK reissue from somebody like Pi or Capital or whoever was doing the reissues at the time, who got the licenses for them. So back in the 70s, the one thing that was really the most important thing was the record. And it didn't really matter because you went there to hear a particular sound. So there was things like Emmy discs. Now Emmy disc is where they would get these records cut in a studio in the UK. So somebody would bring an imported record, or sometimes it was 2 imported records, and you'd have something on one side and something on the other side. They were usually about a £5. So anybody who says in the 1970s, oh, we never played Emmy discs, we only played original records, it just isn't true. And this is a part of history that seems to be airbrushed out. The most important thing was to hear a brand new record, or I should say a brand new old record, records that we'd never had in the UK before. So they were making some incredible discoveries. The Torch was the start of it. It carried on to other clubs as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the Mecca at Blackpool had a brilliant year. I mean, even the top ranking Hanley had for, I think it was 1973, March onwards from 73. Just an amazing amount of discoveries that were played for the very first time. These were, you know, Bob Ralph and Gloria Jones, and there was a whole host of just fantastic records, still so very popular now in 2021. And the collecting side of originals and DJs, I think most DJs probably went down the originals route. There's some that didn't, but in modern times you kind of expect that now. If you're going to one of the bigger venues and you see a boatload of disc jockeys on the stage, male and female, the chances are they're going to be playing original records. They're not going to be playing reissues or anything of that nature. So the collecting scene has really sort of become, I suppose it's a part and parcel now of part collector, part DJ, and there's your hybrid, and that's what the Northern Soul scene's all about these days. Original records, great records as well.
Yeah.
And it's just the way it is in modern times.
Do you, because obviously, you know, you must know a lot of Northern Soul DJs within your circle, or bubble, should we say. Is there a lot of younger, like, is there many young soul DJs that are, you know, investing money in the records?
There's a few, but there's not as many as I would like, if I'm being honest.
Right.
I mean, I'm 50 now, and Keith passed away sadly at 70 years of age, and I think most of the Northern Soul DJs coming from that era of, you know, the Torch, Wigan, Mecca, etc., they're all going to be knocking on the door of mid-60s, maybe a little bit later than that. So these are the people who've still got the records, by the way. These are the people who still know how to fill dance floors. I mean, you've got the likes of Kev Roberts, who, to be fair to Kev, he'll be the first person to admit when he went to the Golden Torch before his DJ days, certainly as part of his entrepreneurial days, he looked up to people like Keith Minshull, because Keith had the records, Keith had the sound, and Kev didn't have any of the worries about promoting or, you know, soul politics or original vinyl. All of these things was just not important at that time, and it was just going to the Golden Torch, having a fantastic time and hearing these wonderful records. So you got what I would say people who are very important within the Northern Soul scene, looking up to people like Keith Minshull. So that's how important Keith was to Northern Soul.
Do you think, like, obviously Northern Soul, I'm not aware of how big the scene is, or how big or how small the scene is. So do you think that Keith's legacy will kind of
I'll say one thing about that. When you take into account people like Keith Minshull, who was attending the wheel, buying records at that time, launching venues alongside Colin Curtis like the Magic Roundabout, the Golden Torch. He then went on to Blackpool Mecca, Wigan Casino. Keith continued right the way throughout the 70s, the 80s and the 90s. I've seen Keith appear at venues alongside other guys like Ian Pep. We used to go to the West Midlands dues that used to put on together, and there was 30 people.
So are you trying to get at that even when Northern Soul, when was there times when Northern Soul probably wasn't as cool as it used to be, but Keith carried on. Well, Keith carried on doing what he was doing.
Northern Soul's always been cool.
Yeah.
That's it. Northern Soul's always been cool. Don't think for a second that it hasn't been. But what I will say is that we had a lull of people who were attending venues in the 70s, wherever they went to, by the way, who probably fell away from the Northern Soul scene. They weren't dropping you know, green and clears or whatever drug of their choice back in those days. They, you know, grew up, had families, took steady jobs, you know, mortgages, all the usual things. I think really right throughout the 1980s, there's only a few places notably that were massive. Kiel was actually my first all-nighter. Kiel was my Wigan, and Kiel was fantastic for me. I walked into Kiel thinking, what the heck have I walked into here? And some of the people who were attending Kiel had been attending Northern Soul Nighters for about 20 odd years, even then. And I thought, jeepers, I'm stood next to a guy or a lady here who's 20 years older than me, and it didn't matter.
Of course.
Because I was just hearing some of these brilliant records. Kiel was obviously a big part. Keith Minshull was a big player when it comes to Kiel. Neil and Jackie Clowes, who ran that for many years, very successful. Top of the world in Stafford, which wasn't really, I've got to be honest with you, it never really floated my boat. There's some great songs that come out of that era. Not many, but there were some real bangers that come out of Stafford. But the highlight for me in terms of a playlist has got to be, you know, Torch, Mecca, Top Rank, obviously some Wigan. There was a lot of awful records played at Wigan Casino, by the way, as well as some absolutely incredible records played at Wigan. But the scene did fall by the wayside in the 80s. The numbers weren't as high as they were in the 70s. But those people came back in the early 90s. They weren't quite ready for the Knackers Yard. They weren't quite ready for the bingo halls or the working men's clubs. So guess what? They started to go out, they were dancing, and they were sort of reliving their youth from 20 odd years previous. Kids have left home. What do we do now? Let's go dancing. In comes Northern Soul. Because once you've been a part of Northern Soul, forget coronavirus. Northern Soul is the worst virus in the world. It never leaves you. There's no cure for it. I'm telling you now, it's the worst thing in the world. You can't say, that's it, I'm going to sell my records, or I'm never going to go to a venue again, I'm never going to have anything to do with Northern Soul. It's virtually impossible to do that.
What is it then? Is it the beat? Is it being part of like the movements? How would you?
The only thing I can tell you is that how I got into Northern Soul was dead simple. We were hanging around at school. I'd be about 15. We were mods, because back in those days you only had to be three things. You were either a mod, a rocker, or you were trendy. So you're trendy, you were wearing the Benetton jackets, and of course your rockers had the smell of frib oil with leathers and motorbikes and Motorhead and all that. Which, by the way, I do quite like some of the rock stuff. I'm not completely alien to it. Or you were a mod, and I went down the mod route.
Yeah.
And it was just the usual Purple Arts, Jam, Special, all the two-tone stuff. This is sort of like 5 or 6 years from the heyday of those times. And then, of course, Motown I was already aware of, because I think you are in Stoke-on-Trent. It's sort of, you know, it's injected into your Motown in this area. And then I got a tape which just said Northern Soul, and I thought I'd been hit by a truck. And I'm like, what is this? And it just hits you. And you want more of the same, please. And then, of course, you start tape swapping, you get new sounds coming through. And I remember vividly we were talking about a record that we'd never even heard, but all of us were chasing a record in the school playground. It was a record by Maximilian. It was called The Snake, which is nothing to do with Al Wilson, by the way. It's an instrumental from the early 60s. And we all wanted Maximilian's The Snake. Oh, you got to hear this, it's fantastic. We need Maximilian The Snake. We never heard it, but we're all chasing the record because it was hype.
Yeah.
And
is it what? But what is it though? Is it just the beat that gets you? Like, is it because with what I find with Northern Soul, like obviously I'm nowhere near as clued up, but it's like it's just that beat, isn't it? It's the beat, and even if I don't know a song, you can't help but dance to it because you kind of, even though you haven't heard it before, you kind of feel like you have. If that makes sense to you, I don't know if it's the beat or what it is, but they're just very like happy songs, very very like the passion in the vocals, and it's just.
Well, you can also
remarkable.
hear when you take a Northern Soul record, especially one that's sang without trace. I always think you can hear the hunger of the artist or artists or the group. They really want to make, money, and they want that success. So they're giving absolutely everything they've got for that 2.5 minutes on the record. Of course, they had dreams and aspirations which were most of the time dashed, you know.
Yeah.
But that's also, it comes through so well on the record when you play. You can hear the emotion. You can hear that it's soul. I mean, that's what it is. You can just hear that fantastic, you know, almost ghetto-like sort of, you know, sound that's only gonna get from tiny independent labels who are trying to mimic the success of Motown, because Motown is the absolute catalyst when it comes to Northern Soul. Anybody who says, I mean, I've heard people say over the years, I hate Motown, I love Northern Soul, and you think to yourself, really? How can you say that?
Yeah.
Okay, Motown was poppy, Motown was polished, Motown was professional.
Of course, yeah.
But that influence launched millions, if not, you know, maybe not millions, but thousands of labels certainly across the whole of America who thought, here's a black guy in Berry Gordy, he's built an empire, we want to do the same.
Yeah.
So they took that inspiration from Motown, and sometimes they brought records out that didn't sell a bean through poor distribution, bad promotion, whatever it may be, but the quality and the content was fantastic. And we picked up on these records, of course, back in the day, very cheaply, put them onto turntables, and people danced. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. One of the best Motown, but non-Motown records ever is J.J. Barnes' Please Let Me In. Now, you listen to that record, and all the artists, and Motown artists, all the producers, I mean, Detroit's got that magical appeal, but there's also things like Agent 00 Soul from Edwin Starr, who ended up becoming a Motown artist. So did J.J. Barnes when Rick-Tick Records was bought out, or purchased, I should say, by Motown. So you can hear that and you go, hang on a second, this is Motown, but it's not on a Motown label. So you've got that as well, which also throws confusion in for anybody who's coming into the scene for the very first time. And it's just one of those strange things that once it gets you, once you start listening to Northern Soul, especially if you go somewhere like Kiel and you walk in, you've got people dancing, sweating, no one's dressed for anything apart from dancing, having a good time. The record bar is hustling and bustling, people buying records, selling records, trading records, and you take all of that and you put it together and you think to yourself, this is where I want to be, this is where, this is something I want to be a part of, and that's why Northern Soul is a movement. Nowadays, I think the social aspect of Northern Soul is very important. This is your weekenders, these are your Northern Soul holidays, for goodness sake, and there's a lot to choose from, believe you me, there is. And it's become much more of a social scene now, probably bigger now than it ever has been, even in its heyday of the 70s. I think there's a lot more people getting involved in Northern Soul and discovering Northern Soul who never went to Wigan in the 70s, never went to the Wheel, or even, dare I say, somewhere like, you know, Kiel in the 80s or other notable 80s and 90s venues, Lowton or whatever. They never went.
But obviously, like you're saying that the scene could potentially, you know, be bigger than ever.
It is.
It seems to be like that every like pub in your town, there must be at least 5 or 6 pubs in every town that have got a Northern Soul do on.
But only in Stoke-on-Trent. Is
it just in Stoke-on-Trent? Yeah.
There is. There's a couple of key areas. I mean, Nottingham's a big Northern Soul area. The West Midlands is a big Northern Soul area. Not Birmingham. Birmingham's a no-no. If you say what's Northern Soul, they haven't got a clue. Liverpool, by the way, there's zero. There's no Northern Soul whatsoever in Liverpool. They were holding something at a place called the Sink Club in Liverpool, but it's isolated. And the Sink Club, really back in the old days when it was originally open, was playing a mixture of sort of R&B, Jamaica reggae, ska, and some soul records, maybe a few imports. But it was never a Northern Soul venue of sorts. It was just a great place to go and to hear some really good songs. That's re-emerged in later times.
Is that why possibly the Northern Soul scene wasn't that big in Birmingham as well, because of the influence of music in the early 80s? You know, like you got the Specials and you got
the whole two-tone movement comes from Coventry, to be fair.
Right.
That's where the two-tone thing was pretty much. I mean, Coventry was like, again, where they were getting in. They were listening to old reggae records and doing their own spin on things.
Yeah.
So that's what you're looking at. However, one thing I will say is that we've got Northern Soul pops up as influences throughout an awful lot of musical genres.
Yeah.
Duffy, Mercy, came out as a 7-inch, which was actually getting a few spins on the Northern Soul scene. We liked it. Things like Edwyn Collins, A Girl Like You. If you look at the 7-inch vinyl, it says Northern Soul scene keeps on burning.
Yeah.
So he was the lead singer with a group called Orange Juice in the 80s. Had a couple of hits with
Isn't the cover a picture of somebody?
It's a picture of a
Northern
and the
Soul
actual
dance,
video to accompany that song is a guy dancing with Northern Soul movements and moves rather. Yeah, so a lot of people have taken, they look at this incredible scene that's been ongoing for the best part of 50 years.
So there is a couple of songs, like recent songs, then that will pop up and do get spun at the Soul Nights. Because one notable one to me is Bob Sinclair tribute. That seems to be quite a popular
now you see
modern day one.
Now you've picked up on something there, which is a Marmite record, and that is, some people love Bob Sinclair, some people absolutely hate Bob Sinclair, and they think it's so far removed from the Northern Soul scene. The one thing that what the Northern Soul scene doesn't have pretty much is boundaries. Now you can take a record from Bob Sinclair, who's got Ron Carroll along on that record. It's quite soulful.
Yeah,
there's no two.
He's got a very soulful voice, hasn't he?
It came from the Sounds of Freedom CD, so you got 3 or 4 generations later of clubbers dancing to that record and enjoying that as a dance record. It's only got played on the Northern Soul scene and it become really popular, and it's a big dance floor filler. But it doesn't have to be black and Detroit or Chicago or Los Angeles, East Coast, West Coast. It doesn't have to be that to be a Northern Soul record. Some say that it does, but there's a lot of blue-eyed soul. There's some British releases, some British only releases. There's Frankie and Johnny. There's Helen Shapiro. There's Johnny Paul. There's a whole host of different records which are now seen as Northern Soul classics, but they're nowhere more like sort of Darlaston as opposed to Detroit. These are just records made in the UK.
Yeah.
If you take something like Helen Shapiro, Stop and You'll Become Aware, it's absolutely brilliant Northern Soul, start to finish, but it's a complete UK production.
Yeah, is it because obviously, like with Alan Shapiro, like say 80% of a back catalogue is probably like 60s pop songs rather than songs that could potentially.
Pop, she was a chart maker. She recorded it. I think it was 14 years of age when she first recorded, and she was having massive hits as early as sort of 62, 63. By the time she'd been a bit sort of time served, the back end, sort of 67, 68, is where her voice had matured, and then we found Stop and You'll Become Aware. She also covered, I think, the Miracle Shop Around. So she was looking at, experimenting with, because she wasn't that young, innocent 13, 14-year-old girl anymore. She was maturing into a teenager, maybe even past a teenager. And Stop and You Become Aware is absolutely brilliant from start to finish. It's just one of them great records that just sits and fits so well into the Northern Soul playlist.
I'll have to listen to that one. I've never
one of the best B-sides ever. It's fantastic.
I'll have to listen to that one.
It's great.
So obviously, uncertain times at the minute. Bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Have you got any plans for the rest of the year? Is there any venues we can see you at? Any weekenders?
There is. We are at this moment in time, not quite sure when this is going out, by the way. But
any exclusives you can give us?
Well, there's no exclusives, but at this moment in time, we've got some gigs that have been confirmed at the Blackpool Tower, Blackpool Winter Gardens, Whitby Pavilion.
Some cracking venues there.
Oh, some great venues. Further afield, we're waiting for confirmation for Benalmádena, or some people call it Benalmádena, which is in Spain. That's always a very popular venue. And at the moment we've got Long Eaton, we've got Rolls Royce and Derby. These are all regular nights, not just big weekenders, not just Wolves, Wolverhampton. We've got the Molineux Stadium, big Northern Soul night there. Brilliant. A couple of 2 or 3 rooms. So we have got light at the end of the tunnel, and we've just got to look now. As long as the restrictions continue to lift, we can have dancing back in there. And when you've got a scene like Northern Soul, that from the absolute start has always been about dancing.
Yeah.
People enjoying themselves, meeting people from different parts of the country. It's such a social, a nightmare for us. We can't do this. And it's the first time ever that the Northern Soul scene, or any scene for that matter,
Of course, yeah.
Can't flourish, and we love it. We absolutely love people. It's the hugs and the handshakes. I speak to Richard Searling about this on many occasions, and it's the hugs and handshakes. If you take some of the Sunday afternoon get-togethers all over the country, you've got people who are there because they all like Northern Soul, of course they do.
Of course, yeah.
But they love the social aspect of Northern Soul that goes with it, and I think to some people, it's just as important in modern terms.
Yeah, I am going to have to ask you something, Oz. Don't be worried.
Okay.
One of the most bizarre things that I've ever seen on a poster is no talcum powder allowed.
Yeah.
What? Oh, come on.
Do you know what? I don't even know where.
It's very random. It's very random.
I don't even know where the talcum powder thing come from. Because when I was at Kiel, there was no talc. I'll tell you now. I think it was probably born in the late 80s, early 90s, let's say.
Sorry to interrupt you. When I first saw it, I almost thought it was like code for something.
Yeah.
I didn't know where.
It is a bit strange, but the talcum powder, when you've got a decent dance floor,
Right.
sometimes they don't polish a dance floor and it's a bit sticky.
Yeah.
So down goes a bit of talc and it helps with those spins, it helps with those moves, but it can also be downright dangerous. The other thing to take into consideration with talcum powder is that when you've got a lot of sweaty people, okay, and they're kicking this talc up, the talc then sort of attaches itself to the sweat and you start to breathe this in, it can really lead to some problems. We've had amplifier racks which have been caked full, all the fans caked full of this browny sort of, almost like a sludge, which is talc and sweat, human sweat, and it's really bad for you. So they say. So that's why, and also it kills dance floors. By the way, it's a real nightmare to polish out.
Right.
So
you're all for it then. You're all
well,
for the.
Look, I don't mind about the talcum powder, but what I will say is, if you've got a venue with a really nice dance floor, and it's going to cost you a couple £100 to get it professionally cleaned afterwards, you've got to make sure that hardly anyone uses this talc because they just don't like the clean-up operation afterwards, let alone the health aspects. So that's the situation with the talc. It is strange though, but I don't think there's any other scene in the world that uses talcum powder as a dance. I think it's only Northern Soul.
Right, before we finish, one question. I don't know if it's an impossible question to ask, but I'll ask it. Where do you see the Northern Soul scene in 10 years' time?
I think it's safe to say the Northern Soul scene over the years, the last few years especially, it's fragmented. You've got R&B nights, you've got soul nights, which is a little bit of a get-together, 50 or 100 people. You've got big weekenders, you've still got all-nighters right across the globe, not just in the UK. That's the one thing about Northern Soul. There's Northern Soul nights now in America, in Germany, in Prague. There's people getting involved with Northern Soul, which is absolutely brilliant news, which means it will continue. Will it flourish? I don't know. But it's going to continue, and it'll probably all come together under one umbrella. So if you've got a particular venue that will accommodate, let's say, 5 rooms, you'll have Modern Soul, which is pretty much anything from 1973 upwards, and they call it modern because it's not 60s 4x4. So you've got that love, you've got Modern Soul, you'll have Northern Soul classics, you'll have a rare soul connoisseurs room playing, one-off acetates and the likes of Butch or whoever. You'll have the R&B side of things, guys from Pow Wow, Nick Parry, or Mace, or whoever playing Latin and stuff. And you probably end up with a Motown Classics youth club sort of room. And all this, really, if you take all of those things in terms of what can be played, they can all be played at a Northern Soul night. Because you do get, sometimes, across the board soul nights, you get a little bit of modern, a bit of Motown, some Northern Soul classics. So I think it's going to continue. I don't think it's going to grow in the same way as it has done, let's say, over the past 10 to 15 years. But as long as there's a collecting scene,
Yeah.
there's going to be a Northern Soul scene. And if you've just paid £500 for a record or £1,000 or more for a record, you're going to want to let people know that you bought one of them records for £1,000, even if it's just to satisfy your own, I've wanted this record forever, now I've got one, and now I've got the money to buy one if one becomes available. So I think that's also another part as to why the Northern Soul scene will continue, and it'll still be here in 10 years. If I'm still here in 10 years, I'll still be playing Northern Soul records.
Superb. Oz, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for the invite, Mark.
Thank you so much. In 10 years' time, come back on and we'll see if your prediction's right, eh?
Let's see.
Superb. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and keep your eyes peeled for some more podcasts.